I began noticing them in places where history does not expect you to look. Not in textbooks, not in academic journals, not in carefully footnoted timelines designed to feel authoritative and complete. I noticed them in photographs. Old photographs. The kind stained with sepia tones and fine grain, where details feel intimate and distant at the same time. Images that sit in an uneasy space between evidence and memory. Photographs that feel honest precisely because they were never meant to prove anything. At first, the realization arrived quietly. A sense that something in the image did not align with the story I had been taught. A man standing beside a doorway that looked strangely small behind him. A group of workers where one figure seemed scaled differently, as if he belonged to another frame entirely. My mind did what it was trained to do. It reached for explanations, perspective distortion, camera tricks, forced angles, early photographic quirks, anything but the obvious conclusion. But the obvious conclusion refused to leave. The more photographs I examined, the more consistent the anomaly became. These figures were not isolated. They were not singular curiosities captured once and then forgotten. They appeared repeatedly across continents and decades, in contexts that made dismissal increasingly difficult. Construction crews, military units, farming families, street scenes, ordinary life. And in these ordinary settings stood individuals whose height exceeded what modern narratives insist was possible, not by inches but by feet. What unsettled me was not just their size but the way they were framed. These people were not posed as marvels. There were no captions highlighting their stature. No theatrical staging. No sense that the photographer considered them unusual. They stood naturally among others, relaxed, sometimes slouched, sometimes leaning on tools, sometimes staring past the camera with the tired expressions of people who had worked long hours. Their presence felt normalized, integrated, unquestioned. That normalization changed everything. If these individuals were anomalies, why weren't they treated as such? Why weren't they isolated, labeled, or emphasized? Why were they simply there, woven into the fabric of daily life? The photographs suggested a world in which extraordinary height was not extraordinary at all. As I traced the dates of these images, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. The photographs clustered heavily before a certain point in time. Then, abruptly, they stopped. Not gradually, not fading out through declining frequency, but ceasing entirely. Somewhere between 1800 and 1850, the record shifts. The giants disappear. History offers no explanation for this disappearance. No epidemic targeting unusually tall individuals. No war that selectively removed them. No medical crisis documented in hospitals or census data. They do not decline. They do not migrate. They simply vanish. That silence is what disturbed me most. One image from Siberia became a turning point in my investigation. Dated roughly to the 1870s, it shows three men standing beside a wooden door frame. The building still exists today. Its dimensions are measurable. The doorway stands nearly 12 feet high. Two of the men appear of average stature for the period. The third has to lower his head slightly to pass beneath the frame. He wears plain work clothing. His posture is casual. His expression is flat, almost bored. There is no drama in the scene. No indication that the photographer was documenting something unusual. This is not a portrait celebrating difference. It is a work crew captured mid-routine. The giant figure does not dominate the composition. He is simply there. Another photograph, this one from the American frontier, dated 1883, depicts railroad workers. 7 men stand in a loose group. 3 of them tower over the others by what appears to be 3 feet or more. Again, no emphasis on scale. No attempt to showcase height. Just tired faces, relaxed stances, the quiet body language of men accustomed to physical labor. The ordinariness of these images is precisely what makes them so unsettling. Extraordinary things tend to announce themselves. These do not. They exist without comment, as if their presence required no explanation at the time. And these photographs are not rare. They exist in surprising abundance. Glass plates, early prints, regional archives, private collections. Enough examples to establish a pattern that cannot be dismissed as coincidence or error. Until suddenly there are none. The photographic record does not taper off. It breaks, as if someone closed a door. As if the subjects themselves were no longer present to be captured. The absence is abrupt, clean, and global. That was when I began to notice something else occurring at precisely the same moment in history. A transformation of cities. Streets being raised. First floors becoming basements. Entire urban layers buried beneath meters of sediment. Buildings that once stood proudly now half swallowed by earth, their original entrances sealed below modern ground level. This phenomenon appears worldwide, not in isolated regions, not as the result of local disasters. Across Europe, North America, Asia, and beyond, the same pattern emerges. Architecture that appears older than its official construction date. Cities that seem to have been reset from the ground up. This event has been labeled many things. Urban renewal, renovation, rebuilding after fires or floods. But when examined collectively, the scale becomes impossible to explain through conventional means. The sediment levels are too consistent. The timing too precise. The architectural evidence too widespread. The mid to late 1800s mark a global rupture. And the timing aligns almost perfectly with the disappearance of the giants from the photographic record. Not loosely, not approximately, almost exactly. That alignment forced a question I had been resisting. What if these two phenomena were connected? What if the event that buried cities also removed the people who inhabited them? What if the mud flood was not merely geological, but societal? What if it functioned as a reset? This possibility reframes everything. It suggests that the catastrophe did not simply destroy buildings, but erased a way of life. Not just infrastructure, but the people who understood how to use it. The operators, the maintainers, the custodians of a civilization whose technological sophistication we have only begun to glimpse. When you look at what survives from that era, a pattern becomes visible. The shells remain. Grand buildings, oversized doorways, enormous halls, windows placed strangely low or impossibly high. Architectural features dismissed today as decorative excess. But something is missing. We do not have detailed operational manuals for these structures. We do not have training programs or written instructions explaining their systems. We do not have clear records of how they were maintained or powered. The knowledge appears to have vanished alongside the people. If the giants were real, and the evidence increasingly suggests they were, then their disappearance would explain this gap. Knowledge that was never meant to be written down cannot survive the loss of those who embodied it. Some understanding is physical, demonstrative, passed through presence rather than text. Official history struggles here, because populations do not vanish without leaving a trace. Even tragedy leaves records. Disease leaves statistics. War leaves graves. Famine leaves demographic scars. But the giants leave none of that. What remains instead is silence. Gaps in census data. Hospital records that abruptly end. Military documents that contradict themselves. Height measurements that appear once, then never again. References to unusually large individuals that surface briefly, then disappear from subsequent accounts of the same events. The inconsistencies are not random. They cluster around the same decades, the same years, the same rupture. Even the photographs themselves have not been left untouched. Many surviving images have been altered in later reproductions, cropped to remove scale references, resized to normalize proportions, adjusted in ways that subtly erase what was once visible. Comparisons between original glass plates and published versions revealed deliberate changes. Someone worked to make these figures disappear. And that realization carries implications far beyond photography. Because if the giants were erased, then the world we inherited is not the world that existed before. It is a version curated by those who remained, a story edited after the fact, a history that begins only once the inconvenient elements have been removed. The absence is not empty. It is shaped, and it demands to be examined. The disappearance of these giants raises some unsettling questions that touch upon the very nature of history itself. Who had the power to remove not just people, but the memory of people from the record? It's a question that lingers, persistent as I dive deeper into the evidence. When we look at the historical context, the absence of these extraordinary individuals seems increasingly deliberate. The more I ponder this, the more I see the deeper implications of such an act. An erasure so thorough that it extends beyond just physical bodies. It is an erasure of knowledge, of culture, and ultimately, of a way of life that has been obscured for reasons yet to be fully understood. Everywhere we look across the globe, a consistent pattern emerges in the 19th century. It's not just the disappearance of giants from photographs. There is a simultaneous disappearance of records, documents, and other forms of evidence that might explain what happened to them. The gap in the human record during this time isn't just accidental. It appears meticulously planned. In North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia, we see similar signs of a global disruption, one that erased entire populations or at least systematically wiped away their footprints from history. And the evidence doesn't stop with the disappearance of people, it extends to the architecture left behind. The most glaring example of this is the Tartarian architectural style, a distinctive and advanced building method that stretches across continents. Structures from this era often appear oversized and out of place, towering above the streets they stand on, with doors too wide and windows too large. At first glance, these features seem excessive, unnecessary. But when considered alongside the idea of giants, they suddenly begin to make sense. These buildings were built for a different scale of human being, one that operated in ways we can no longer comprehend. If the giants were indeed the builders and custodians of these structures, then their sudden removal explains the absurdity of such oversized proportions. These buildings were never meant for normal-sized humans. They were designed for those who stood at 7, 8, or even 9 feet tall. This connection between architecture and giants raises another profound question. Why were these structures designed in such a way? The sophistication of these buildings cannot be dismissed as mere aesthetic choices or excessive grandeur. There is a distinct functional element that has been overlooked in the mainstream narrative. These buildings were not only large, they were highly advanced, engineered to support systems of energy collection, atmospheric manipulation, and efficient water and air circulation. The precision of their construction is beyond what was believed to be possible in the 1800s. These systems were likely powered by a deep understanding of natural forces, harnessed in ways that modern engineers struggle to replicate. So, if the giants were the operators and maintainers of these advanced systems, then their disappearance would have marked a profound loss for humanity. The knowledge of how to operate these complex systems, knowledge that was never written down, never transcribed into books or manuals, was likely passed down through physical presence and demonstration. The giants were not just figures of extraordinary size, they were also the ones who understood the intricate workings of the world around them. Their expertise was embodied, carried in their very presence and abilities, passed down through generations. But then they were gone. Suddenly and without explanation. The buildings remained, but the knowledge of how to use them evaporated. The systems that powered cities, generated energy, and harmonized with natural elements were abandoned. And as the giants disappeared, so too did the detailed understanding of how to sustain and repair the world they had built. The catastrophic event that caused their disappearance, whether it was a deliberate removal or a natural disaster, left humanity with only the physical remnants of a once thriving civilization. We are left staring at doorways and windows that seem too large, buildings that make no sense, and a world that feels fundamentally disconnected from its past. But the erasure doesn't stop with architecture. The historical record itself has been altered in ways that are impossible to ignore. Hospital records from the era are curiously incomplete. Census data becomes inconsistent, and entire years of documentation simply vanish. What we're left with are fragmented pieces that don't add up. When we dig into military records, we find mentions of unusually tall individuals, sometimes listed as being well above average height. Yet, these same individuals disappear from other records, leaving behind no trace of their existence. There's a deliberate inconsistency in the historical documents. References to giants, tall people who lived among the rest of society, appear in some accounts but not in others. These inconsistencies are too precise to be the result of simple error or neglect. It feels as if someone or something is actively erasing the memory of these giants, actively working to make them disappear. In many cases, photographs of tall individuals have been altered in subsequent printings. They are cropped, resized, and reprinted with adjustments made to normalize their proportions. The giants are made to appear smaller, more in line with what we expect human beings to look like. The discrepancies are not random. They are purposeful, coordinated. And the further I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just an isolated occurrence. It was part of a larger, global effort. The manipulation of photographs is just one aspect of this coordinated erasure. The deeper I looked, the more I uncovered examples of global disruptions in the historical narrative. Records that had been altered, stories that had been rewritten, evidence that had been suppressed. And the timing of these disruptions was striking. It wasn't just a random set of events. It was happening all over the world during the same period, the mid to late 1800s. This was the time when the giants disappeared from history. This was the time when Tartaria, a civilization that spanned continents, was seemingly wiped from the face of the earth. What if this was not just an accident of history? What if the disappearance of the giants was part of a larger, deliberate effort to control knowledge? What if there was a global agenda to suppress certain truths about the giants, their role in society, and the knowledge they held? What if this coordinated erasure was done to maintain control over the narrative of human history? After all, if you can control history, you can control the present. If you can rewrite the past, you can shape the future. The more I think about it, the more it seems as though there was a deliberate intention to sever the connection between the past and the present. The giants were not just removed physically, they were erased from the collective memory. Their knowledge, their expertise, and their way of life were buried along with their bodies. What was once common knowledge became lost, obscured by time and the erasure of records. And the destruction of Tartaria, the burial of cities under layers of mud and sediment, was the perfect cover for this erasure. It provided a reason for the disappearance, a natural explanation for the loss of entire civilizations, and a plausible excuse for why there was no record of what had happened to the giants. But if the giants were removed, then what remains? What happened to the knowledge they carried? If they were the ones who understood how the systems worked, who maintained the free energy devices, who kept the architecture functioning, then what did we lose when they were taken away? We are left with the shells of their civilization, but without the knowledge to use them. And that's where the real question lies. What happened to the knowledge that was lost? What if the world we live in today is not the world we think it is? What if we are not progressing but regressing? What if the giants had access to knowledge and technology far superior to anything we have today? What if the systems they built were far more advanced, far more in harmony with nature, than the systems we rely on now? The giants might not have been the creators of everything we see, but they were certainly the protectors of a lost world. And when they disappeared, they took that world with them. We may not realize it, but we are living in the aftermath of their disappearance. The buildings, the architecture, the remnants of a lost technology, they're all around us. But we no longer know how to use them. We no longer understand their purpose. The giants were not just a physical presence in the past. They were the bridge between a lost world and the world we live in now. And when that bridge was destroyed, we were left with nothing but fragments of a past that no longer makes sense. The giant figures we see in photographs, the towering individuals who once walked among us, may be the last remnants of a world we have forgotten. And until we understand what happened to them, we will continue to live in the shadow of that loss. The deeper I delved into this mystery, the more I was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The loss of the giants wasn't merely a historical anomaly, it was part of something much larger. A global transformation that seems to have intentionally erased an entire chapter of human history. The question of what knowledge was lost in their absence becomes more pressing with each discovery. What if the technology and understanding that the giants carried were not only superior to what we have now but were actually the foundation for everything we take for granted? What if we are living in an era of recovery rather than progress? This thought has been haunting me for some time. The technology left behind by these giants, if they indeed were the custodians of that technology, appears to have been far more advanced than anything modern humanity has achieved, despite our supposed technological progress. The architectural systems they managed, the free energy sources they may have used, the harmonic resonance structures embedded in Tartarian buildings, these are all markers of a civilization that existed at a level of sophistication we can barely comprehend today. Consider the buildings again. They are not just oversized in a decorative sense. They are not simply monuments to excess. These structures were created to house complex systems that integrated with the environment, systems we can no longer recreate or understand fully. The architectural designs that seem so impractical to modern eyes were built to operate in harmony with natural forces: wind, water, magnetism, and atmospheric electricity. They were built for functionality, not for aesthetics. The scale of these structures suggests they were designed with operators in mind who could interact with systems we are still trying to understand. The giants, towering over ordinary humans, may have been the only ones physically capable of maintaining and operating these systems. Their height was not a genetic oddity but a functional characteristic. They were not freaks of nature, but essential members of society who kept things running smoothly. The advanced technology of their time, free energy systems, harmonic chambers, natural water filtration, atmospheric power, would have required individuals who were more than just big in size. These systems required an intimate understanding of how to balance and manipulate natural forces, and that knowledge was likely passed down through a living tradition, embodied in the giants themselves. They were the keepers of that wisdom, the ones who could interact with the systems directly, who could maintain the complex balance between technology and nature. But when they disappeared, so did the knowledge they carried. What happened to all that information? Did it simply vanish? Or was it deliberately hidden, obscured, and suppressed? As I began to examine the historical record more closely, I started to notice a pattern of deliberate erasure, not just of the giants themselves but of everything connected to them. This wasn't just a disappearance that happened through natural causes. No, this was something orchestrated, something much larger than what we can see on the surface. The mid to late 1800s stand out as the pivotal period when the giants vanished and Tartaria was buried.